Greetings from London. I'm Patrick Hughes, Vice President of Pluto Press in North America. We are an independent publisher of urgent and rebellious nonfiction books. Established in 1969, Pluto Press is one of the oldest radical publishing houses in the world. I'd like to welcome you all to our Summer 2025 Lead Title Preview. We are here today with 5 authors writing on incredibly vital subjects. These books embody the unique Pluto Press perspective that speaks truth to power and represents often oppressed, marginalized, and underrepresented voices worldwide. I see this event as an opportunity to hear directly from our authors and gain unique insight into their scholarship. Before we get to the presentation, I'd like to introduce Verushka Selbach, Managing Director of Pluto Press, who will say a few words about our publishing company.
Hi, everyone. I'm Verushka. I'm the Managing Director of Pluto.
You're on mute.
I'm not, but that's okay. Sorry, guys. I'm the Managing Director of Pluto Press. And welcome to our Spring 2025 list. A few years ago, we made a strategic decision to publish fewer books. Alongside the idea of publishing fewer books, we thought they're going to have to be better, and they are. You'll see that in the next 5 presentations. And this strategic decision has allowed us to spend more time on each book with each author, working on the text, working on the marketing, and making sure that those books really work and get out into the market. This has been paying off. In 2024, we had our best year ever. And we have been able to spend more time on every book. And it's a real pleasure to be able to do that. So without any further ado, except I want to introduce something new that we're doing. It's got nothing to do with all of this, but it's just a little taster. This is a board game that we're publishing. It's called Billionaires and Guillotines, and we will be doing a Kickstarter in April. So hold on to your hats. This is going to be fun. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
All right. Thank you, Verushka. Our first author to speak is Kylie Cheung and her book, Coercion, Surviving and Resisting Abortion Bans. Kylie is a staff writer at Jezebel, where she writes extensively on reproductive rights and gender-based violence. She is the author of Survivor Injustice, State-Sanctioned Abuse, Domestic Violence, and the Fight for Bodily Autonomy. Her work has been published in Salon, Teen Vogue, Guardian, and Ms. Magazine. She lives in Brooklyn. Kylie?
Hi, thanks so much for introducing me. I can just talk a bit about why I wrote Coercion, if that works for everyone. But about 3 years ago, after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade with Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health, the gruesome horrors inflicted by abortion bans began immediately and haven't stopped. I wrote Coercion to make the case that these aren't just unintended consequences of post-Dobbs abortion laws, but acts of state-perpetrated gender-based violence inflicted on women and pregnant people, particularly those with the least resources and agency under capitalism and white supremacy. The intended purpose of abortion bans, I argue, is to police and control pregnant people and their reproduction, to serve as a tool in the toolbox of domestic abusers, to worsen economic inequality and racial violence, and to actively kill pregnant people by denying or delaying their access to life-saving abortion care, or by entrapping them with their abusers in a country where homicide is a leading cause of death for pregnant people. I wrote Coercion to spell out all of this, to tell stories that are slipping through the cracks, and to make sure the stakes of what's happening right now are as clear as possible. And then in terms of the target audience for Coercion, I see that as an emerging wave of readers who have become more invested in the movement for reproductive rights and justice following the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022. Coercion carves out the particular experiences of pregnant people, abortion storytellers, survivors, and victims of sexual and domestic abuse within the context of state violence and survivor justice. My book educates and mobilizes feminists, survivor justice advocates, women and people of color, allies, and left-leaning readers who seek to expand their understanding of the deeper implications of abortion laws. This text fills a specific market gap in existing literature about the topics of gender-based violence, state violence, criminalization, and the politics of pregnancy. It explores the intersections of these areas with a focus on the experiences of victims of state and interpersonal gender-based violence. Coercion is written to be accessible for readers approaching the reproductive rights and justice movement for the first time, as well as readers who have been involved in this movement for years. Yeah, and then the main takeaway of the book is too often abortion is misunderstood as a policy debate in the abstract, when in reality, the laws that govern our reproductive decision-making can be life or death and are inextricable from a broader policy landscape of state gender-based violence. I hope everyone who reads this book sees policies like abortion bans as deeply, fundamentally violent when they're done reading it.
Okay. Thank you, Kylie. Just wanted to just ask one question. You know, now that we're a few months into the Trump administration, what would you say is next for the reproductive justice movement?
I think in a lot of ways, unfortunately, but also not unfortunately, the work really does remain the same. The stakes and the environment in which people are trying to provide and receive and help people receive abortion care are obviously um, extremely restrictive and dangerous and violent, but at the same time, there are people who have always been um, doing the work of connecting people to abortion funds and helping people receive the care that they need. And in a lot of ways, that work remains the same as we just continue.
Mhm. Well, thank you very much. And we look forward to this book coming out later this year. Our second author is Stewart Home and his book, Fascist Yoga, Grifters, Occultists, White Supremacists, and the New Order in Wellness. Stewart Home is a legend of the counterculture. He is an artist, filmmaker, pamphleteer, art historian, and activist, and the author of countless pulp fictions, including most recently Art School Orgy and She's My Witch. He regularly performs to audiences worldwide and recently started making headstand paintings where the canvas placed above him and brushes held in his toes. He was born and lives in London. Stewart?
Hi, thanks, Patrick. I guess fascist yoga is a hidden history. So what it addresses in terms of that history is the way in which what you can call modern postural practice or modern yoga was invented in the first half of the 20th century by white supremacists. And what they did was they mixed Western gymnastics with a Western misunderstanding of Tantra. And then they claimed that this was a 5,000-year-old tradition, which was the inheritance of the white race because it was invented by the blonde Aryan invaders of the Indus Valley on the Indian subcontinent. And it begins with Pierre Bernard, who is a figure some people with an interest in the history of yoga will know, and looks at the way in which his alleged guru lineage is very problematic, then moves through various other figures like Guido Keller, who was an Italian who set up a yoga group in 1920 and was involved in D'Annunzio's proto-fascist occupation of Rijeka, known to Italians as Fiume, and then proceeds through some of Bernard's followers, such as Francis Yates Brown, who wrote the book The Lives of the Bengal Lancer, turned into a film with Gary Cooper starring, and recommended viewing for SS members under Hitler and the Nazis. Yates Brown was a fascist and a friend of the fascist leaders, including Hitler. So that's one strand of the fascist yoga that we go through. And then I look at how after the war, with the defeat of the Axis powers, other than a few lone figures, most people didn't really want to call themselves a fascist involved in the yoga world. Not everyone who was doing yoga even prior to the Second World War was a fascist, obviously. But with the kind of COVID lockdowns and various other things, an anti-vax movement, that kind of fascist moment within yoga has returned in the 21st century. So we see that interest among influencers in yoga influencers in QAnon and various other things. How I came to write the book is I used to go to the gym and do my weightlifting and do my boxing. And I was asked by a young writer what it was like to do readings in public. And I said, oh, I could do them standing on my head. And then I thought, oh, yes, why don't I actually literally stand on my head and do my readings? Because I recited from memory, so I didn't need the text to read. There was no gymnastics class at the gym, but there was a yoga class. So I went to the yoga class. So that was what led me into yoga. And I was quite disturbed by some of the claims made about the poses that you were taught at the class. You know, that if you did a shoulder stand, it would cure leprosy or some such thing. So there was a health concern with it. And also I was not very happy with a lot of other things they said. So there was a lot of backbending, which could, again, when you read the sports science, damage the spinal disc. So this is the flip side from the concern with the political issues. There's also physical health issues with yoga. You can do long-term damage to your body. So having gone through a little yoga training, my takeaway from that was that, you know, if you want to do yoga, you'd probably be better off doing Pilates, or maybe you want to do weightlifting, which is what I prefer. But, you know, up to you.
Stewart, just want to, this is sort of an inside yoga question, but most people know Indra Devi through Michelle Goldberg's book, Goddess Pose. I mean, however, Devi's book, Forever Young, Forever Healthy, was released by education publisher Prentice Hall in the early 1950s. I thought you might say a few words on the history of their history of publishing dubious self-help books under their Parker imprint, especially Walter Delaney's Ultra Psychonics, How to Work Miracles with the Limitless Power of Psychoatomic Energy, and Anne Bodenhammer Martin's Metabionics.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting books published by Parker, who also published Davy and Richard Hiddleman, who was an important yoga influencer. And this is Ultra Psionics. It was actually written by a editor at Prentice Hall who couldn't believe how much money some of the other authors were making. Frank Rudolph Young is an author I cover. And of course, you have Heal Yourself with a Magic of Gnostic Power, or Secrets from Beyond the Pyramids, or even The Sexual Key to the Tarot, Alexander Lawrence, key reading if you believe in New Age nonsense. So yes, Prentice Hall were considered by some a serious publisher, but the Parker imprint just churned out these crazy books. And even the Indra Devi book, you know, she talks about telepathic communication with ants to get them out of her apartment. So there's some pretty crazy material in there. And if you want to go to Richard Hiddleman, he is he completely opposes evolution. He's a creationist, but a kind of neo-Hindu creationist rather than a Christian one, again, published by Prentice Hall. So that is quite a crazy publisher, and there's quite a story related to them within the book.
Okay, well, we really look forward to that book coming out this July. So our third speaker is Nancy Hiemstra, who along with Deidre Conlin are the authors of Immigration Detention, The Big Business of Locking Up Migrants. Nancy is a political geographer whose research focuses on U.S. immigration enforcement policies. She is the author of Detain and Depart, The Chaotic U.S. Immigration Enforcement Regime, and co-editor of Intimate Economies of Immigration Detention. She's an associate professor of Stony Brook University on Long Island, New York. Nancy?
Thank you, Patrick, and greetings to everyone. In 2012, my co-author Deirdre Conlin and I started looking at the money involved in U.S. immigration detention, trying to answer the question, who is making money and how? Since then, we've gathered thousands of documents tracing how profiteering drives the use of detention and published nearly a dozen academic articles. But we felt frustrated that despite all the alarming evidence piling up, the detention system only grows and becomes more abusive. we decided to write a book to reach a wider audience with the belief, the hope, that if more people understand that migrants are being detained not because it's effective, but because it is incredibly profitable, there will be more resistance to this predatory practice. So Immigration Detention, Inc. is an expose of the biggest detention system in the world. In 2024, the US paid over $3.4 billion for a permanent daily capacity of around 40,000, spread out in facilities all over the country. That's an average of $150 per day for each adult detainee, and more for families and children. Our book traces where all this money goes. A lot of people already understand that private prison companies like Geo Group and CoreCivic are big winners here. But Immigration Detention, Inc. uncovers the alarming range of additional stakeholders that make money from detention. It's also counties that rent out jail space to ICE, and companies subcontracted to provide food, medical, commissary, and other services needed to keep a captive population alive. The book shows how all these entities make money by giving detainees less than what they should. With few guidelines and sham oversight, they feel free to cut corners. The less food and medical care they provide, the more money they make. In the detention industry, bad care is the business model. We also show how detainees living in abysmal conditions are so desperate to buy basics like extra food, ibuprofen, and soap that they work for $1 per day in jobs essential to operating the facility. So detention operators also save big on nearly free labor. Immigration Detention, Inc. is coming out precisely as the second Trump administration, as part of its mass deportation plan, is working to aggressively supersize the U.S. detention system. Many people are alarmed and enraged by the drumbeat of news about workplace raids, ICE in schools and churches, and the targeting of so many more immigrants for deportation. And we're hearing a lot about migrants thrown in detention these days. The book provides critical insight into these immigration headlines. It is aimed at readers who want to better understand who benefits from these new policies and why the U.S. is detaining so many people. Immigration Detention, Inc. traces out the financial relationships behind the expanding detention system, showing how money is made by literally starving and sickening detainees. In doing this, the book cuts through the myths that detention is necessary or effective, and it concludes with suggestions for practical actions that readers can take to work against this appalling system.
Okay, so in your chapter on detainees as coerced workers, you mentioned a 4-ounce can of tuna at the prison commissary requires 3 full days of work. Can you elaborate more on how food is used as a weapon in these facilities?
Sure. So all detention centers have stores or commissaries that sell a huge range of items like food, medicine, personal hygiene products, clothing. And the prices of commissary items are significantly inflated over what you would pay at a store. So, for example, a detainee at the Orange County Jail in Goshen, New York, would pay $2.85 for that can of tuna, compared to about $1 at Target or Walmart. But the conditions of detention are so horrible that detainees are desperate for any way to make things less miserable, so they buy from the commissaries. And if detainees don't have family or friends who could put money into their detention center accounts, they need money. So they work in facilities' so-called voluntary work programs, doing jobs like food prep, cleaning, laundry, maintenance, earning that $1 per day for an 8-hour shift. And then whatever money they earn, they spend in the commissary. So the detention operator gets practically free labor, which brings their costs down and increases profits. And often the commissaries are owned by the same companies or investment groups that own the companies making money by providing detainees with awful food and profoundly negligent medical care. So this cycle is created where detainees are hungry and sick, desperate to buy whatever they can in the commissary to make life less miserable, and so willing to work for almost free. The companies make money by providing horribly subpar food and medical services, selling inflated goods in the commissaries, and paying very little in labor costs.
Well, thank you. A very important book. Our fourth author is Rahul, The Psychic Lives of Statues, Reckoning with the Rebel of Empire. Rahul Rao is a reader of international political thought in the School of International Relations at the University of St. Andrews and the Professorial Research Associate at SOAS University in London. He is the author of 2 books, Third World Protest, Between Home and the World, and Out of Time, The Queer Politics of Postcoloniality, both published by Oxford University Press. He is a member of the Radical Philosophy Editorial Collective. Rahul?
Thank you, Patrick. Even if you've never thought very much about statues, you will have noticed that something interesting and important was happening around them in the summer of 2020, when in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter protests in the US, but over a much wider swathe of the world, were coalescing around statues in protests against institutional racism, but also the afterlives of colonialism and slavery that were felt to be palpable in so many places. I had actually begun thinking about statues in 2015 when a movement called Rhodes Must Fall called for the removal of Cecil Rhodes, the Victorian settler colonist who is responsible for the colonization of large swathes of Southern Africa, who we might think of as a kind of Elon Musk of the 19th century. When this movement called for a removal of the statue of Rhodes that sat on the campus of the University of Cape Town. For the protesters, the statue of Rhodes was a metaphor for the continuing whiteness at the university, the enduring legacies of apartheid that they saw visible in the whiteness of the university curriculum, campus, and community. But alongside these efforts to topple racist statues in the Western metropolis and its settler colonial offshoots, statues are being built on ever more monumental scales by different communities in places like India, in a sign of their growing rivalry along lines of religion and caste. So I wrote this book because I wanted to understand how and why in these many different places, the US, UK, South Africa, India, Australia, and elsewhere, statues seem to have become terrains on which racial and caste supremacy are being asserted and also contested. I think the book will interest readers who are curious about the politics of race, caste, and decolonization. It might also interest readers who are curious about the connections between material culture and ideas and ideology, particularly those who might be puzzled about how inanimate objects like statues can arouse such intense feeling, both for and against them. I think there are 4 main takeaways in the book, although I'm sure readers will find their own meaning in it. At least I hope they will. First, the toppling of statues is not just a fight against white supremacism. In many cases, they're also expressing dissatisfaction with older modes of fighting that supremacism. So, for example, the Rhodes Must Fall movement was not just a critique of the endurance of the legacies of apartheid, but also a critique of the Mandela generation for failing to do more to dismantle those legacies. Secondly, I think it's important to remember that statues are being built as much as they're being toppled. I think it can be easy sitting in the West to assume that the statue form is obsolete, a kind of archaic relic of the Victorian era. But the fact that statues are being built on ever more gigantic scales, I think points to the fact that they continue to be important media of representation, ways of claiming immortality that elites find useful. Thirdly, both the toppling and the erection of statues is being justified perplexingly through the frame of decolonization, a term that is deployed and used by both racists and anti-racists. And so one of the things that the book tries to do is to help readers navigate their way through these confusing and contradictory deployments of decolonization. And finally, this is a book about identity, my own, but I hope also the identity of readers. I became interested in Rhodes Must Fall because my own graduate education in the UK was funded by a Rhodes Scholarship. And so thinking about the movement and the issues it raised forced me to interrogate the caste privilege in India that had made me eligible or competitive for a scholarship of this kind. So the statues that I study in the book call out to me because they speak to different aspects of my identity and experience as a writer and an intellectual. And in writing the book, partly in the register of memoir, I hope that readers will also be able to tell their own stories through and against the statues around them.
Well, thank you. Um, uh, well, most of the book details the toppling of statues. Perhaps you could tell us about the tallest statue in the world, the Statue of Unity, and what you refer to as competitive statue building in India, and the relationship to Hindutva, the right-wing Hindu nationalist movement.
Sure. India is a frenetic arena of statue building and has been for many decades. Communities consolidate their hold on different parts of the public sphere through building representations of their respective political and religious icons. So from the 1960s onwards, the Dalit community has built many statues of their foremost leader, Ambedkar, who was also the drafter of the Indian Constitution. Dalits are the community that were formerly called untouchables, but that term has now been replaced by Dalit. And the Hindu right has responded in kind by building their own statues, of which the Statue of Unity is one of the most recent examples. It's the tallest statue in the world, twice the height of the Statue of Liberty. It is a statue of the first Home Minister of India, who's credited with forging the Indian Union as we know it today after independence. He's called the Bismarck of India sometimes. It's in the home state of the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who models himself as a kind of successor to this figure. And it's in the Narmada Valley, which is an ecologically fragile area that is also the site of a massive hydroelectric project, one of the most controversial development projects anywhere in the world because of the huge numbers of indigenous people that it displaced. So this is an area that has been a kind of ground zero for authoritarian governance in India, the kind of governance that Modi is now so well known for. And the Statue of Unity, what I call the Statue of Impunity, is one of the most spectacular visual symbols of the kind of politics that he's trying to cultivate.
Thank you, Rahul. Our final presenter today is Susan Ferguson, who, along with Titi Bhattacharya, are the editors of Making Life and Death in Palestine, Social Reproduction in Settler Colonialism. Susan Ferguson is an associate professor emerita at the Wilfrid Laurier University and a research affiliate at the University of Houston. She is the author of Women in Work, Social Reproduction, Feminism, and Labor. She serves on the editorial board of the webzine Midnight Sun. Royalties from the book are going to Taiwan, a Palestinian-led foundation that aims to strengthen the Palestinian civic society economically and socially. The funds will be directed to Taiwan's programs supporting students to continue their studies at Gazan universities. Susan?
Thanks, Patrick. Listening to these other presentations, I'm just so excited about the Pluto lineup for the coming season. People are dealing with, from abortion and the far right through to migrants and anti-colonialism, grappling with statues, etc. There's just so many important issues, and this book is no different in that we are focusing on the very sad and devastating situation in Palestine right now. Genocide and settler colonialism are really all about the erasure of the Palestinian people. But despite the devastation and violence, life goes on. Images, we know this through images of children playing in the rubble, of the iftar table that was sort of coming out of the rubble. We see it in all the daily posts that are being posted right now. As Munira Kayat, who grew up in South Lebanon, writes, to stay alive in such conditions, meaning conditions of war, is not merely despite them. Her point is that it is a creative, life-affirming, often joyous act of resistance to actually just stay alive. So this book is about Palestinian life-making in the context of Israeli occupation. It's an attempt to understand what life-making in these conditions, not just the conditions of genocide today, but of Israeli settler colonialism more broadly, looks like, and importantly, what it means for understanding the dynamics of the colonialist capitalist world. The idea for it germinated after October 7th, 2023, when Israel's assault made its genocidal intentions clear, and people around the world came out on the streets to protest this American-backed genocide and settler colonialism. So Tithi and I, as co-editors of this book, saw two needs. One was for a need for an analysis that goes beyond analyzing the region's geopolitics, political economy, and political resistance within Palestine, all important things to analyze, but we wanted to drill down deeper by examining how those very dynamics get instantiated in the day-to-day lives of Palestinians. Social reproduction theory is a Marxist theory that does just that. It highlights and tries to explain the power dynamics and contradictions in spaces that produce life, as opposed to spaces that produce commodities, the goods and services that our capitalist economy runs on. It can help us understand, social reproduction theory can help us understand how life-making can both accommodate and resist capitalist settler colonialist powers. So to that end, the book includes chapters on Palestinian healthcare, childhood, childbirth, education, understanding and tearing apart the whole question of what scholasticide looks like and is and why it exists, checkpoints, ecology, and civic infrastructures such as the water systems. These are all aspects of daily life-making in Palestine. Many of the essays examine these through an historical lens. So the second need that we saw had to do with the social reproduction theory as an analytic framework. Tithi and I are co-editors of a series on social reproduction theory through Pluto. So very little within this subfield of Marxist feminist theory addresses settler colonialism specifically as the dominant context. Rather, we tend to talk about social reproduction in terms of relation to capitalism, often Western capitalism, where settler colonialism is obviously still very present, but is not the dominant framework for understanding social reproduction theory at this point. And that means that we talk about capital's need for workers to be reproduced, to be socially reproduced. Although we argue that capitalism also undermines the conditions of working class reproduction through low wages and racist, transphobic, colonialist state policies, the premise is that capitalism needs human life to continue. Well, in the case of Israel, of course, which is a capitalist society, that isn't straightforwardly the case when it comes to Palestinians, clearly. And so Tithi and I wanted to provide a forum to address this very question and to develop social reproduction theory as a stronger analytic tool for understanding the world. We think there is a wide audience for this book, especially right now. With the outbreak of the genocide, there has been a massive interest in learning about Palestine. This book was written to deepen that process of learning among activists and also among academics. And since the outbreak of COVID-19, there's also been considerable interest in understanding how life-making relates to the broader relations of power. And so our series, Pluto, has done very well, in particular, because of that, I think. The 13 contributors, it has 8 essays, many of them are co-written, are all scholar activists. Most have published about the region in popular and scholarly forums before. They hail from the US, Canada, the Netherlands, and Palestine. The main takeaway, I think, of the book is that making death and life in Palestine deepens our understanding of how and under what conditions Palestinian life-making persists despite a century of occupation and annihilatory policies, while also considering the role it plays in resisting Israeli capitalist settler colonialist powers. I think you're muted.
Given Greek economist Yanis Varoufakis' writings at the end of capitalism and a techno-feudalist future becoming a reality, how does social reproduction theory work as a critical tool against command capital and algorithmic power, a class of oligarchs he refers to as cloudalists?
So, I mean, that's a big question. And I'll just say upfront, I'm not convinced of the techno-feudalist analysis thesis that it represents the end of or a different type of capitalism, but or the end of capitalism, I guess is his point. But I don't, without going into all of that, I do want to acknowledge, of course, that there is, the point that our life making today is completely integrated with, or largely integrated with, digital capitalism, and is a source of algorithmic capital's profits, etc. Is true. I don't, the things that I like, or the searches and the Siri commands that I might make can be all part of my social reproductive labor, even if it's not overwhelmingly so. And I think I would be inclined to say that it tends to get a bit exaggerated about how much of my labor it actually feeds into those circuits. But nonetheless, to the extent that it does, I think it's true to say that it our sort of digital sphere has intensified the commodification of social reproductive work, and contributed to the loss of privacy, which is certainly interesting, and drives our consumption as well. And so in all those ways, it kind of tightens our relationship to capital. And I think it means that when we're considering how to resist capital, it's important to think that through and to try and include or understand how, when we're trying to organize against capitalism, thinking about our use of those technologies is going to be part of that too, and trying to take democratic control and using those technologies against capital is an important element of the struggle.
Okay. Well, thank you, Susan. Well, that's the end of our presentations. I'd like to thank all of the authors for their time and, of course, choosing Pluto Press to publish their books. I'd especially like to thank all the viewers who joined us today. Pluto books are available through the University of Chicago Press Distribution, Ingram Wholesale, and AK Press Distribution in the United States, the University of Toronto Press Distribution in Canada, and Wiley here in the UK. I'll share a link of our catalog at the end of the program, as it has more information on field reps and ordering information. So for all of us here at Pluto Press, good night from London.